de parler de la réduction du carbone, voilà. Ça veut dire que plus vous polluez, plus vous payez. Voilà, c'est cette organisation qui est le... J'ai oublié l'appellation en anglais, mais je vais mettre ça dans le chat. C'est CCL, voilà. Et on est chargé de, voilà, on est chargé de créer au gouvernement ivoirien pour leur demander de considérer l'empreinte carbone pour que les plus gros puissent payer. Ça va les permettre de pouvoir moins polluer. Voilà, je te laisse continuer. D'accord.
Hello.
J'attends, c'est ça?
Good morning. I'm very happy to join you, and thanks for giving me this chance to speak about the situation of the climate crisis and the challenge of the climate activism in the Middle East and Northern Africa. I'm very happy to join you, and I hope I can explain what's happening here. But I'm not French speaker, so yeah. Okay. Hello, my name is Alhassan Mohammed. I'm first year student at Faculty of Arts, Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, climate activist and environmental activist since 2019, and the founder of FFF in Sudan since 2019. I love to join sessions and panel discussions like this to describe the reality of the climate crisis in my region, which is the Arabian world. You know that my region is one of the regions considered one of the most affected by the climate crisis, especially in many aspects such as the drought and desertification, and also the high level of fees. And also I tried to document the climate justice activism with a book. I didn't publish it yet, but I'm trying to publish it this year. The book also talk about the climate crisis from scientific point of view in a simple way, so that many can understand what's happening, like apart from the complicated scientific terms. I used to write it with a very simple way. I also love to describe the relation between the climate justice activism and other issues, such as the link between climate justice and the social issues and the racism, and also the countries which are occupying, such as occupied Palestine, and also the issue of the fossil fuels wars. You know that my region, we faced many wars which were depend on the fossil fuels, such as the war in Iraq and the current war in Syria and Libya. So this is that's the point that I always love to share and discuss. And I'm very happy to join you, and I hope that we can give, or I can highlight this issue in a simple way. And yeah, I'm very happy. Thanks for giving me this chance. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this. So for us here back in Africa, particularly in my country, which is Nigeria, climate change has really affected us here. And it's telling. I mean, the impacts keep getting worse every day. say, let's talk about the extreme temperatures we're experiencing here. I mean, it gets really very hot, and of course, everyone gets really very uncomfortable with the extreme temperatures. And when we, towards the end of the year, when we're expecting some harmattan, that's winter in some countries, we do not get to experience that as much as we do years back. So it just come up like a few weeks or a few days, it's a bit cold, and then it gets hot. I remember when I was a kid, I mean, during Christmas time, I will have to put on very warm clothing. But right now, it doesn't happen that way. And so we missed that joy, that experience around Christmas. I remember those times, like when you have your new Christmas dress and then you have to put on a sweater or a cardigan on it. You can't get to show off your beautiful dress. And I mean, so it's so disheartening growing up. But right now, I mean, though I don't really have Christmas clothes anymore, but I mean, those are experience that I know that kids of nowadays don't have such experience anymore. I mean, they get to flaunt their dresses because the weather is hot and it's not as cold as it is. And aside that, again, we're having inconsistency in annual rainfall, and of which periods where we expect early rains, we're not having those rains anymore. At times, we have early cessation of these rains, even with the predictions that we have from the meteorological department in my country. So, I mean, this has really affected a lot around crop production, especially affecting farmers, especially the smallholder farmers. And of which, back where I come from, most of the we have quite a lot of agrarians here, and because there's a lot of food production around the northern part of Nigeria, and so that has really affected the farmers. And so most farmers have to abandon their farmlands to look for alternative source of livelihoods to support that. And so that has made food also to become really very expensive, because I mean, there's a decline in the annual food production. I mean, so the food is not sufficient to go around like every households and even states and around the country. So that has brought up a hike in the cost of food, and not just climate change, but there are also other factors that are contributing. The insecurity, the issues around transportation, fuel, and stuff like that, amongst other factors. But climate change plays a significant role in worsening these situations around. And so when you get to speak with some of these agrarians, you're moved by what they say. You feel their pain. And of which we know, when we have a decline in annual food production, we're talking about malnutrition especially amongst children, aside lots of livelihood. So that has really increased the poverty index in a lot of in our country, and I mean, worsening the hardship around, and looking at the fact that most countries are just coming out recovering from COVID-19. I wouldn't say we have fully recovered as a globally from the impact of COVID-19, and so then there's the impact of climate change. I mean, so that's almost like a double slap on your face, and so it's really a tough one. And aside the inconsistency in annual rainfall, we're experiencing drought in some parts of Nigeria as well. And so this has actually also affected agricultural production, and which I have spoken about that in terms of the inconsistency in annual rainfall. And so we're not just experiencing this impact around food crops, we're also experiencing this impact even on livestock as well. And so this drought is causing a lot. We're having a lot of water scarcity, of which there's no potable drinking water for people, especially those in rural communities. So the impacts are just numerous to mention, happening in my country, in Africa in general. We're also having, I mean, we were also having loss of biodiversity as a result of climate change. I remember growing up, there's this particular area in my state where you could actually see bats flying around even during the day. So, I mean, it's like they have colonized that area and have made it like their habitat. I mean, I grew up knowing that, I grew up seeing that, and everybody knows about it. But I mean, right now, we do not even have them anymore. We do not even see them anymore. I remember seeing some very beautiful butterflies, termites, and some other insects, some birds like that. I do not see them anymore. Aside the fact that some human activities have actually made them to be endangered or go extinct, we also have another contributing factor, which is climate change. So climate change is making us lose a lot of our natural resources. We're not seeing those plants that we usually see before. We're not being able to raise those crops that we have been raising before. We're not able to see those animals that we have been seeing before. And aside that again, I mean, the hardship on people, on our health as well, is becoming, I mean, so unbearable. And we all know that one of the overall impacts of climate change is on the human health, and of which a lot of us are experiencing that already. I mean, we could tell the elderly is suffering, the women are screaming, the children, and every other person. And it's so unfortunate that people don't even understand that the climate is changing, but they know. But the good thing is they know that something is really happening. So usually when I speak with people that don't even want to understand that or don't want to accept the fact that the climate is actually changing, I try to bring them back like maybe 5-10 years ago to understand what is happening. And so it's so beautiful when you get to speak with probably the media or farmers, and you ask them, oh, what's happening back 5 years ago? I mean, what was on the news, or what was your experience back 5 years ago? And they tell you, oh, I used to have when I make at the end of the cropping season during the harvest, I make like 100 bags of maize or 200 bags of maize, but right now I'm making just 50 bags. And so you ask them, so what do you think is causing that? And they begin to tell you, oh, the rain and other aside other factors, like that. And then you can actually make them, they can relate to what is happening. So it's always very easy to relate these scenarios with climate change. So even if they do not want to literally say the climate is changing, but of course there's something happening to the climate. So it's really, I mean, and of which is not out of will I say out of context to say that yeah, I'm with you. Okay.
Sure. Yeah. So we really just want to share the climate impacts with you in the global north. I believe you activists all around from Europe, and currently I think I'm speaking to you. You might be in Germany, right? Yeah. So the impacts of climate change on the global south is devastating. We can only talk from the lived experiences of our people on a daily basis. In the last 2 months in South Africa, for instance, we had extreme rain events that are once in a 1,000-year events, and we had 2 of them occur in the same place in 2 months. So that particular area, one of the provinces called KwaZulu-Natal, KZN, would have got 600 millimeters of rain over 1 year. Over that first instance, 381 millimeters of rain fell in just 72 hours. In just 72 hours. It created total devastation, and 550 people lost their lives. 550 people lost their lives. This is a direct climate shock, climate impact that people don't want to relate to. But now the message is getting through that this is climate change. Our 4th biggest city in the country, this week, one of the dams completely dried up. And within the space of probably 6 to 8 weeks, they will suffer something called day 0. Day 0 means the day that will come when there will be no water in the taps for that city. One of the dams that feed into the system has already dried up. It's expected that the other dams, 4 or 5 dams, probably all have water in below 20%. So the normal rains for that area is not falling. So that will be day 0, they will suffer. Already we are seeing in certain areas, the drought is being exacerbated. So these are real issues that Gloria is talking about. When we say to people climate change, they might say, we're not talking about climate change. But if you tell them that the rain hasn't arrived on time, or that the area is unusually dry, or that food will be impacted, these are the real lived experiences of people every day. And as you know, there's a stat that says Africa contributes in between only 2 to 4% of global emissions, but we will suffer 100% of the impacts. The scientists tell us in the global south, particularly in southern Africa, will suffer double the global average. So in the global north, we constantly talk about keeping global temperatures below 1.5 degrees from pre-industrial. We're already at 1.2. We are moving to 1.3 very, very soon. So that means we're suffering 2.4. So the impacts are already here. It's not 20 years into the future. It's not a decade away. It's not 2 decades away. It's very, very real for us on the ground. So we want to form these alliances with the global north, make you perfectly aware that of the impacts. And then always we ask the question, we have activists from the global north asking us, well, what can we do here? You know, we heard your stories. We feel very bad for you. We know that it's impact, but what can we really do? Of course, you can do, you can call for action. You know that in Bonn this week, the call for loss and damage and climate reparations was off the agenda. It was rejected in its entirety towards the end of the conference. Now we must be able to activate global ridicule for the global north and for the financiers and for the politicians. And next week at the G7, you guys must be vocal, you must be seen, you must be serious, you must be committed. But that's only one event. This is a multi-year conference, a multi-year campaign. We're calling for this to happen. You must be making sure this mechanism is developed in such a way that it becomes a real negotiating tool, not only now as the call at the G7, because we know they'll just listen, but we must make them hear and we must make them see. But going to COP27, we must also make it realistic. But you mustn't treat this call as the flavor of the month. You know, this is what we're going to happen this week, and next week it's fashionable to change the call. The call for climate reparations must be uniform, must be consistent, must be loud, and must be unambiguous. And then the global north must take it seriously as you join with the global south to make this campaign a reality.
Oui, oui, je suis là, je suis là. J'avais un problème de réception, voilà, voilà. Euh, Ce que je voudrais, je vais doucement et tu traduis, c'est ça? D'accord. Ce que je voulais dire d'abord, c'est euh, euh, je soutiens déjà ce que notre ami du Nigeria a évoqué tout à l'heure. L'Afrique est le plus touchée, au fait. Voilà. L'Afrique est le plus touchée sur ces questions de changement climatique. Or, pourtant, nous polluons le moins possible. Tu peux aller avec ça déjà? D'abord, il faut remarquer qu'on a une perturbation météorologique déjà. Au niveau de la météo, vous savez que les saisons sont bien réparties ici en Afrique, par ricochet en Côte d'Ivoire, et on a remarqué que les saisons ne se respectaient plus. Voilà. Il y a une alternance qui ne respecte plus l'ordre établi naturellement. Je veux dire que il fait plus chaud et les saisons pluvieuses ne sont plus très adaptées aux mois auxquels il y a convenance. Voilà. Voilà avec ça. Voilà, il y a les tempêtes, les sécheresses, il y a des atteintes sur le fonctionnement des écosystèmes naturels, ainsi que les espèces qui y vivent. Il y a une modification de la biodiversité, on va dire. D'accord. Ça marche.
I'm sorry, I thought it was for other actors. Can you repeat the question? Okay, the question is really clear now. I want us to highlight some reports. Like for the first part of the question, you asked about the impact of the climate crisis in my region. As I mentioned at the first of my speech here, that our region is one of the most affected by the climate crisis. And you know, there are many reports about this reality. First of all, the reports of the IPCC, and this shows us that first of all, the first impact will be on temperatures. This temperature will witness new rises, while a decrease in rain is rare. And the current rates of the climate change have already outpaced many traditional mechanisms of the treatments. And the people now of the European world are trying to make kind of adaptation with the climate crisis, because they don't have the resources to avoid it. So they are trying to be to be familiar with this and to adapt with it. And there are many news and many reports about this impact that shows us that this danger in our country is really imminent. And I can mention one of the reports by the New York Times. This report was in the title "Postcard from a Burning World." This report contained information on the dangers of the climate crisis on 193 countries, including the Arabian countries. For example, in Saudi Arabia, the country will witness high levels of temperatures, and also in my country, Sudan, the country is suffering from sandstorms, and also we are now facing some problems related to the sand, and also related to the soil. As you know, that our country seems to be agricultural country, because 70% of the soil is fertile soil, and the climate crisis will affect this soil. This soil will be weak soil, so this will affect the crops. So this will lead to problems of hunger, poverty, and migration, and even death, because this problem in the crops will lead to lack of food, because the soil is not like the previous periods. So this will lead to problems, and also this agricultural problem can lead to security crises, because as a result of this problem, the people will try to make conflict to get the best soil for their crops, and this will make problems, especially in the countrysides. And I would like also to mention that, for example, in Egypt, the danger is no longer threatening the agricultural crops, but also threatening the pyramids, which is like historical scenes. So also the experts are repeating now warnings that the city of Alexandria and large parts of Nile Delta might be under the sea, because of the problems related to the rise of the sea, of the Mediterranean Sea, due to the climate change. And also in Yemen, there are many reports talking about the heavy rains, and the problem of the sandstorms, and also the problem of the floods. And I will just mention that in 2020, in our country, we faced a devastating floods, and those floods were a sign of the climate, and we are trying now to avoid them. Yeah, no. Huh? So this is what I'm trying to mention. Actually, at the early, this crisis seems to be one of their hands. So they need to avoid this by making one thing, that they need to make support for the countries which are the most affected, because this crisis is just by their problem. Because most of the countries which are now used to be the reason of the climate crisis in the countries which are trying to make just a revolution of capitalism. And so when we say this thing is just like facing us in our main resources of life, we need to say to them, no, this is not the right thing to do. As a summarize for my point, I want to say that most of the European countries are now trying to, for example, talk about sustainable development, and at the same time that they are making a new revolution of fossil fuels industry. This is something used to be double standards. If you need to make sustainable development, if you need to make something good, you need to stop supporting the companies which are making crises in our country, especially in Africa. Many of the, for example, the Italian companies, the British companies, and also other countries are trying to invest in the crises in Africa because they think that this is just a matter of profit, not a matter of like saving the people. And I would like, in 2015, after the Paris Agreement, they make agreement that they will finance the most affected countries with $100 billion. Until now, they didn't give anything to the governments of these countries, so they need to do this, and also they need to stop burning these countries, and they need also to stop making other things which are like I can mention. They need to stop the problem of the racism, especially the right-wing societies which are trying now to describe that all of the economic problems are because of the immigrants and the refugees, and the ironic thing that most of the immigrants are like out of their countries because of problems committed by the governments of the European countries. For example, the African countries, especially because most of the problems that happening in the African countries are a result of the previous colonization of the European countries. And so this is what you made, and you need to solve it by helping these people, because you destroyed their countries before many decades, and now also by the companies of the fossil fuels industry. This is the thing that we need to talk about it with strong words. And also, I would like just to highlight, when we talk about climate justice, we need to link the climate justice with other issues such as the racism, and also, as I mentioned, the issue of the defenders of the land. Like, for example, we all know that there is occupation called the Israeli occupation in the historical land of Palestine, but now in the media of Europe, people are just like, when we criticize the Israeli occupation, the people just give us this sign of anti-Semitism. We need to differentiate between anti-Semitism and the Israel, because when we try to talk about the resistance of the Palestinians, people who are under the Israeli terrorist occupation since 7 decades, we need to mention that the Israeli occupation committed many crimes against the humanity. Thousands of the Palestinian people were killed by this terrorist occupation. But now, when you talk about this in public in Europe, they will just say you are anti-Semitism. And I would like to highlight also there are many groups and organizations like Natori Karta, which is the City Guard, which is one of the Jew organizations, is also working on this field. But now, anyone who talks about this, they will try to describe it with the accusation of anti-Semitism. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think the only my voice is clear or not?
Alhassan, I think they direct the question at me.
What? I'm sorry, I can't hear anything. Can you repeat?
I said, I think the question was directed. I'll
Okay.
answer. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Soja, can you repeat your question, please? Thank you. So what's very, very clear in the negotiations from COP26 in Glasgow, from the Bonn meeting, is that governments are still not thinking about concrete actions and not cooperating and not taking the demands of the global South into consideration and not playing ball or not being fair. What is important is that we recognize two things, right? So as much as there's global activism, the real solutions will have to be negotiated by governments, states, and corporations. So we can't get away from that fact. But what we can do is to make sure that we build solidarity. What is happening now? So even though the outcome of Bonn was disappointing, what is really the positive takeaway is that countries in the global South are forming a unified front. And every day we get stronger, right? We must make sure that we preach unity amongst the global South countries. We strengthen our negotiation capability, and we do that by building solidarity in civil society. Okay, so I made a number of points about what we can do directly. So first of all, we need to talk honestly about the injustices, the injustices in the global South. We need to talk about the extractivism, and we need to talk about the impact of oil and gas on our economies and on our societies. We need to be honest about this thing. We have to talk about it openly, and the global North needs to take responsibility for its role. We need to call out the universities of the global North. Young people like yourselves go to university, go to colleges. You need to do what Esteban did yesterday at the meeting in Denmark at the University of Copenhagen. He stood up and he called out the guests from Total and from the other oil and gas corporations, and they staged a walkout. You need to be more bold. You need to be more courageous. You need to be doing that. You must call out your academics that defend the oil and gas industries. Those ones that work for Repsol, that work for Equinor, that work for the oil and gas corporations. You need to call out your banks that continue to fund extractivism, exploitation, oil and gas, and you need to call them out for greenwashing. This kind of thing is real. So we're building the solidarity on the ground. You need to call out your politicians. We had the visitor from the German Chancellor came to visit South Africa, and he spoke to our leader in South Africa, right? So when climate activists disrupt his meetings, he calls out those climate activists. He needs to recognize our right to protest, right? So you need to also make sure that you amplify the campaign in the media, like you are doing today. We must constantly make sure this agenda is talked about and spoken about and exposed in the media. And then this is the two practical things you can do. You need to support activists in the global South. If you invite them to meetings like this or to conferences, you need to make sure that only the big NGOs can normally pay for themselves, but there are activists on the ground that need to be heard. They need to be there, but they don't even have access to data. They are not on this call because some of them can't afford the data that is necessary on this call. So when you invite them, in the pre-work that you do, in the planning that you do, make sure you plan to allocate some financial resources for them. Also, you need to do the obvious thing. You know, I come from South Africa. We defeated the crime of apartheid. You know what was apartheid? It was when Black people were oppressed. We defeated that on a number of ways. We did that by building global solidarity, and we promoted a boycott, worldwide boycott of South African companies. So what we need to do is launch a global campaign to boycott the oil companies, the banks, and the corporations that support climate exploitation, both in the global north and in the global south. So we luckily, this generation is no longer so brand conscious as previous generations. We used to walk around with the emblems and the logos on our clothes. And when we did research, those were the same corporations that were polluting plastic pollution, using child labor. We must do the same thing in the climate crisis. And we must do what Hassan said, we must recognize the intersectionality of all of the crises. These are concrete things we can do today. But we also recognize that the solution is going to come when governments, corporations, banks, the finance companies come to the table. So we can only do so much, but what is within our power is to be rebels. We can continue to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So for us here, it's a little bit challenging, but then we approach it diplomatically because there are some states in Nigeria where you cannot, there's certain activities that you can't engage in. And so because of security reasons or certain laws and stuff like that on ground. But of course, so most times what works for us well is if we could find a way to have this more of an advocacy visit where we could meet with our elected leaders to have one-on-one discussions with them. Though we organize very little protests around, and we've had activists that have had one or two protests around the coal mining happening in some states in Nigeria, where some of them were locked up. I mean, the authorities came after them, but thankfully, some of us rallied around them to give them the necessary support in our own little way. And so it's a bit challenging because there are so many threats. So what basically works for us more is to see how we can meet with more of an advocacy where we can meet with these elected leaders and get to talk to them. Then most times again, we try to create permanent dialogue mechanisms with the government where it enables us to sit together on a round table to be able to discuss on issues that borders us around environment. I mean, that has proved to be more impactful because the result is always like almost immediate because you get to have their commitment, I mean, in the course of the negotiation. So, but once in a while, like I said earlier, we still go about to do one or two protests on the streets or some little activities like that on the streets. But of course, we pick the locations or we can do that. And we try to seek for permission as well from the police, from the necessary authorities before we can embark on that. But what basically works for us, like I said, is that negotiation platform that we have with our elected leaders. Thank you.
That is a fundamentally important question. It actually goes to the entire nub of the argument, and which our campaign seeks to address. We can't keep the fossil fuels in the ground permanently without assistance from the global north. A lot of countries in Africa suffer from what we call the resource curse. We have too much resources, but it's not resources that are compatible with a 1.5 world. So that's the reality. So what we need to do is we need to push for these kind of campaigns where if the global north cancels the debt, then we can be released of the burden of having to service their debt. And then we can keep the fossil fuels in the ground and don't have to sell our souls to the devil, so that we can develop our countries in a sustainable way. This is very, very important because it's what our politicians tell us all the time. They say, no, if we don't extract, if we don't sell the oil and gas, then we won't be able to develop. But we need innovation, we need disruption. So the transition to renewable energy is the greatest economic opportunity on the planet. So, and we are endowed in Africa and the global south with wind resource, hydro resource, wave energy, and particularly solar. So we must be encouraged through responsible lending and through the cancellation of the debt to move to the just transition. We had a major bank executive said, well, how will we do that? What do you think Malawi will do and Tanzania will do if they don't get access to oil and gas? We said, well, we had that same argument when people were saying, how will Malawi, Tanzania, and Ghana get access to telephones if we don't lay cables? We said, no, we leapfrog that technology direct to mobile and cellular technology. So this is a method that has already been tried and tested. The just transition is going to be the mechanism. It's going to be the opportunity where most of the job creation will come from, where most of the development will take place, because it's the biggest economic opportunity on the planet. We can't be held permanently to extractivism and to fossil fuel and oil and gas. But we recognize that that is the only solution if we don't get the cooperation of the global north, if we don't get the cancellation of the debt, and if we don't get everyone on the same page. So my answer is it's not an easy answer, but it's an answer that we are currently developing with cooperation from the global north.
Oui, je suis là, j'ai pas bien perçu la question, s'il vous plaît. D'accord. Je pense que il faut se tourner vers les énergies renouvelables parce que en Afrique, on est trop dépendant de ces énergies fossiles. Voilà. Les ressources naturelles qu'on a, on les puise pour pouvoir en faire euh, un développement chez nous. Je pense qu'il faut passer aux énergies fossiles. Je pense que lors de la journée de l'Afrique, j'ai organisé avec l'ONG 350, on est allé devant la BAD et on leur a demandé de plus soutenir les pays africains dans des projets d'énergie fossile. Donc, je pense que c'est sur cette dynamique-là qu'on pourrait euh, avoir un changement propre vers cette transition énergétique.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you for arranging it. Thank you very much.
Merci, merci.
Bye,
Merci.
everyone.